Grant Shapps has said recruiting 30,000 teenagers for a year-long stint in the armed forces is what the country and the military sorely needs. He says that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Red Sea attacks and conflicts in the Middle East show that things are only moving in one direction. Shapps said that the National Service placement planned by the Conservatives is an important step in building up the country's resilience. The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, reacted to the National Service plan this morning.
I think this plan is desperate. I think they are rummaging around in the toy box to try and find any plan that they can throw on the table. I don't think it'll work. You've seen what military experts, those with experience, have said about it. You've seen what the government said about it just a few days ago when they were asked, that would take away from the resources of the military rather than help the resources of the military. This is a government that has hollowed out our armed forces. The army is now smaller than since Napoleon, I think. And so you haven't got a coherent plan on the table.
Well, get your calls in for this now. 0207 862 2222 is that number. Kevin, what do you reckon about the National Service plan?
Yeah, have you seen Grant Shapps? He couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, the
I'm
Defence
not sure
Secretary
he'll have
saying.
to go in for it.
Nevertheless, yeah. Look, it's a crazy plan, never really intended to be implemented. A serving minister, Steve Baker, has this morning come out against it. Northern Ireland minister fears he'll be dropped as a candidate now in the election. It's just been dreamt up. There's about 750,000 18-year-olds in this country, and they say put 30,000 in the forces. Well, that's 1 in every 25. The others would have to spend 1 weekend a month doing some form of volunteering with the police, fire brigade, RNLI, NHS.
Isn't that a good thing, though?
Can you imagine if you're a copper or a firefighter or you're a doctor, you're going to be looking after these people at a weekend rather than doing your job? And then what are you going to do about those 18-year-olds who've got a job already and work, as a lot of them do? Or they play rugby or football or cricket. Are you going to say they can't do that? Look, it's been dreamt up as a manifesto idea that is nuts. But what I really dislike is this idea that all 18-year-olds need to toughen up, they aren't resilient. That most of them are. It happens that older generations, particularly politicians, keep saying the younger generation's feckle. It's just not at the race. It's not the case. It used to be, God, they've got long hair and they're like rock and roll. This will be terrible. Come on. There'll be individual cases where people do need something to do and you can locally fund organisations. The government's run down the armed forces and it's slashed youth services and all of a sudden they dream up this. It's a gimmick. It's a joke.
What do you think, mate? Because actually some people are really supportive of this.
Well, I think it's a great idea, but like a lot of Tory policies, it's been sold badly, in my view. The optics aren't good because it's not really about national service in the way that we used to talk about it. You know, after the Second World War, Europe was in ruins. So there was a case for getting people to join up for 2 years of national service in case it happened again. We could see what was going on. We can't see what's going on around the world now. It's too big. I think it's a great idea. The 30,000 will be a core elite number of youngsters who get the opportunity to start a career in some form of work for the government, whether it's in cyber, whether it's in the military. When I was at school, we had something called the Army Cadet Force. You may remember it yourself, OK?
I didn't have it at high school.
Yeah, well, we did at my school. We had an Army Cadet Force, and these kids on a Friday afternoon, Saturday, would dress up in military uniform and parade around. It gave them a sense of pride. And the 750,000 we're talking about here, Kev, are neither in education, nor training, nor employment. Surely that's a target for them to do something.
No, that's totally wrong.
No, it's not.
750,000 or so is the number of 18-year-olds in this country. It's not the number of idle 18-year-olds. It is the number of 18-year-olds.
This is going to be for everybody across the board, even if you've got university jobs.
Well, Grant Shapps said specifically, unless he's got his facts wrong, 750,000 not in education, employment or training. That's who they're going to reach out to try and give them a sense of purpose in their life. And I think that's a good thing.
They're reaching out to even the Royals' children, so it's everybody regardless of your situation. So it's an equaliser, some might say.
Hang on.
Yeah, but for those...
Hang on, those royal kids just become honorary colonels of regiments when they grow up anyway. I mean, that's
for those looking for something to do, this is now an opportunity to get in there. And by the way, to rubbish the idea that at weekends they would just be shadowing somebody, hang on, when we come into ITN, there are people going around shadowing others because that's how you learn to do the job. And it's a great thing that they've got an interest and they can see a start in life. It's a good thing.
If my house erupts in flames on a weekend, I don't want the fire brigade turning up with a load of 18-year-olds and being told to be down there. If I break my leg playing football and I go to hospital, I don't want some 18-year-old having to be there trying to fix me leg.
Well, I don't think they'll be fixing it.
Get
No,
real.
come on. You get real.
No,
you're not real. You're on Planet Zog.
No, I'm not. You know it'd be a proper...
Planet Zog
It
here.
would be a proper ambulance crew, but attached to that crew might be a youngster who had a uniform on, was starting their career, they wanted a career in the health service, and they tagged along to see how it's done. You're being a bit disingenuous here, Kev.
That's not the case. You can have work experience, or you can have a conscript army of 18-year-olds, which will cost you a fortune to deal with.
Let's go to our callers. We're asking, would this national service scheme, will it toughen up our youngsters? Do youngsters need toughened up? Grace from London, you're up first. What's your thoughts on this?
I think it's all a bit of a moot point because I'm afraid I don't think, well, I wouldn't say I'm afraid, I think the Tories aren't likely to win. And I think in theory it could be positive because I think there are great things that could come about from young people doing some of these activities. But I think it's ironic because the government is very much about people all making all their own decisions all the time, opposing a nanny state, opposing a cap on bankers' bonuses, all kind of like, people should be able to do and accumulate as much as they possibly can, never mind anyone else, kind of the thinking of this government. So it seems ironic. But also, young people, through no fault of their own, are growing up in a very different culture from that in which previous generations who did national service grew up. Young people who went off to fight in the world wars would have heard, for example, the words, greater love has none than this, than that one lays down his life for his friends, because young people were hearing the messages of Jesus, who told us that we should care about others and put others before ourselves. Plenty of them wouldn't necessarily believe it, but it was kind of part of the culture, whereas now young people are growing up with very different messages, and they're being surrounded by advertising that tells them just to do what they want. And that doesn't mean that young people are all selfish, by no means. Lots of people are very concerned
But hold on,
about
Grace,
others.
is that not what they're trying to change? Is that they're trying to change the psyche of the young now to be much more community-driven? And isn't that the point in this?
I don't think you can force it like this. I think a lot of human beings, myself in particular, are naturally stubborn. And if you tell people to do something, they'll feel all the more inclined to not want to do it. And I think, especially at the age of 18, I just don't think it's going to work. I think that we should be encouraging young people from a really young age to care about others, but trying to make people do things at the age of 18, I just think it's not going to work.
The age of 18, I sort of take your point, but we do force people to do things, and even this government that wants to be slightly more hands-off forces people to do things. We have to pay tax. We have to go to school.
Yeah,
we have to we have to get
running.
an education. You don't necessarily have to go to
Surely, aren't we? I don't think this is forcing anybody to do anything. I think it's saying to young people, here's an opportunity. Now, look at the opportunity, grab it. It's a start in life. It's not a very big start in life, but at least it gives them some focus. And I think it's a good thing if people can commit themselves to something which also helps the country.
A minister today wouldn't rule out people who refuse to take part being arrested and fined.
Well,
others have.
Well,
they've said they won't be jailed.
They've ruled out
Grace,
that they
Grace,
won't.
I think, look, it's an absolutely lousy scheme. And I hate this denigration of a younger generation. But how do you think we can engage those who, for whatever reason, are alienated and don't volunteer, are dropping out of the system? How do we engage them?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, absolutely. Because you made a lot of sense earlier. Yeah.
I think, like I said, you need to start things from an earlier age. I mean, I was hearing from a very young age that I should look to put others before myself, because that was the kind of thing I was hearing in Sunday school. I didn't believe it necessarily at the time because I hadn't chosen to believe at that age, but I was hearing those things from an early age, that Jesus taught us to put others before ourselves and to not seek our own interests. And that was kind of part of the culture that people previously grew up with, and it isn't now. So I think you need to try and find a way to encourage people from a young age to think about the community. And I think that, maybe some of the things that happen in the schools would be good to do that. Also, like I said, people are surrounded by advertising in a way that people previously weren't quite so much. And advertising makes money off of us looking out for our own interests. So we need to do something to challenge that messaging. And having a government who allows people to accumulate far more wealth than they could ever possibly need, and a prime minister who pays less tax as a percentage of his income than the majority of the population, is not particularly helpful for encouraging people to think about wider society.
Nobody's going to
Okay,
be
Grace.
dragged into it, are they? I mean, if somebody's on a 5-year accountancy course, OK, they're not suddenly going to be told you've got to give up your accountancy course and you've either got to join the military...
The way I read it, we might be
compulsory
reading it
to
slightly
work.
differently, but the way I read it was an equaliser. It was everyone across the board. It didn't
No,
matter.
well, you won't
if
be
you had a university place, it didn't matter.
Well,
if you had a job
hang on.
and a
Even
work-
in the Second World War, they didn't always take people out of university to fight in the army and the navy if what they were doing was going to be beneficial to the country in the future, i.e.
What?
the country's economy.
What, so you allow students, university students, get out of jail free card, and then you want to use university as then
hang
caught
on.
in the net? Where's
Hang
the
on.
fairness in that?
Hang on, if the students are studying science and that's going to lead to some scientific development in this country, why would you stop their
But
university
I think
course?
it's part of the two-tiered system of this. The way I read it was that you had an option of doing a 12-month national service, which
That's
I
right,
believe
all
you would get
weekends.
some sort of
Yeah.
payment for
Yeah.
because it would be like a job, or you could do it as a voluntary basis
Yeah.
at the weekends, and
Yeah.
you could do that. Essentially, it would be about 25 days, so not much. So if you did have a university
Yeah, you could
placement
do
or you
that.
had a job, you would be doing that.
Of
But that's
course you
still
could.
forcing somebody to volunteer their
Well, I
work.
don't think it is. I think it's offering an opportunity, and I think bright people will say this is another string to my bow of life, and
Mate,
I'll do
you've got it wrong. The idea is not
No,
to offer.
I haven't got
It's
it
you
wrong.
have to take. You have.
I don't
Grace,
think I
thank
have.
you very much for your call. Joyce from Somerset, what's your view when it comes to national service, I suppose?
I think it's a rubbish idea.
Why?
What on earth is Rishi Sunak thinking about? Do you know, if you
The
put
army?
them into the service, they'll smarten themselves up. He's setting a right example, isn't he? Walking around with a suit and trainers on. You know, I mean...
You know, they're trendy trainers, Joyce, or they were until he wore them, and they are pretty expensive as well.
Well, only people with him who are avoiding paying the right tax and whatever, and letting all these people who don't pay tax, only people like them can afford it. You know, the people that should be toughening up the teens are the parents.
Yeah, you know, Joyce.
You know, I just don't understand. You know, it's just on the pot.
Joyce, you sound like Andrew Murrison, who is a defence minister, a Tory defence minister, who last week said there was no plans for any scheme like this because if you put all these sort of volunteered, pressed kids in with the regular forces, you'd lower morale and they'd all discipline would go and there'd be no retention. And if you just left them on their own, then you'd have to divert soldiers doing their real soldiering into looking after these kids who are only going to be a year and then they're off. No, you're right.
Yeah, but Joyce, can I ask you this? There's a generation of Gen Zers who don't have anything to do in life. You know, they're not in employment or education.
Hold on, you're saying that there's a generation of them.
No,
There's not.
no.
There's
No, hang
a
on,
certain
Joyce.
percentage of them.
What you're doing is you're saying nobody should bother to try and find something for those people to do. Nobody should bother to consider how damaging their lives
No,
are
she's
if they're
not.
inactive. There are too many inactive young people in this country, and in my view, they should be
No, she's not
invited
saying
into helping with the running of the country.
You're distorting
What
what
do you
she's
say
saying
to
and
that?
try
I'm
and
not distorting. I'm not
defend a
distorting.
position
But
that's
let Joyce,
indefensible.
let Joyce come back to that. So what would you say, Joyce, to the, let's say, Gen Z who aren't in work or full-time
I listen
education?
to Kevin quite a bit. And what's the other gentleman's name?
Mike and Kevin, I don't know which one you were referring to there.
How many brothers and sisters have you got, Mike?
2 sisters.
2. I had 6 brothers, 5 sisters. We all left school, we all found a job, we all worked.
Excellent. But the modern generation don't do it like
Yes,
that.
they
Parents,
do.
They
it's the
don't.
Parents letting them do what they flaming well want, innit?
I totally
And
agree,
then
but a
you've
lot
got
of them
Rishi
don't.
Sunak going around like a flaming idiot. You know, he should be setting up, he should be setting an example.
I think Joyce is maybe trying to be a bit trendy and more accessible to people, but clearly has failed to do so in your eyes with his sambas. Thank you very much for your call.
1 of 12, though. Wow, that's a big
Peter,
family.
that is a huge family. Yeah, you don't get families that size anymore. Peter from Preston, what's your view when it comes to national service?
I think it should be introduced. It's I joined at 16 with a junior leaders regiment, did my training for 2 years, and then went on to the regular army. Now, I think in the generations now with the internet, it's totally different from when I joined. We had youth clubs and different places to go and do things. Now, the youth haven't got anything to do. Now, the Junior Leaders Regiment installed, and the Army installed self-discipline within myself and my colleagues, and we got friends, and we got trades, and we learned how to communicate with loads of different people. The youngsters nowadays, they've got nothing.
Well,
They need to have
crucially,
something
Peter,
installed.
the biggest criticism to what you said is crucially, you chose to go in and do that. What we're talking about here is not giving people a choice. So you've got people that are potentially reluctant to join any sort of military service or national service, being forced to, and as Kevin said, potentially bringing the morale of the whole army down. I mean, how would you like to be a serving officer that has to look after a 18-year-old that can't get out of bed?
No, but that's my point is that they should be doing about 2 years training and doing community service at the same time. And after that 2-year period, just like they do in the continent, you have the choice of either continuing on into the armed forces. It would solve the numbers. It would install now about healthy eating, keeping fit, learning the skills, getting the children or the kids and young adults off the streets from the society and internet that's been and stuff that's been thrown around on the internet.
Okay,
Peter, but we can't get away from the fact you volunteered and you wanted that to be your career, and it sounds like you did it successfully, which is very different to dragooning people in. And it differs around the continent, but conscription, national service, was scrapped in 1963 because it was incredibly expensive, it was inefficient and unpopular.
Necessary. It wasn't necessary anymore. We didn't need it anymore. We just didn't need it.
Peter, one last word to you. I want to get into another call. Peter, go on.
Yeah, I think nowadays there's no direction for young adults from 18 or from 16 upwards, and it will install these morals.
Okay, you think, reluctant or not, it will teach them something. Peter, thank you very much for your call. Steve from Kent, what's your view when it comes to national service? Do you think this will be a good idea? Bearing in mind, only 30,000 places will be given to military service. The rest will be served in other areas of the community.
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've got a son of 22. I'm a bit perplexed as what the aim of this is, because if it's to fill the gap of the armed service, well, that's not going to work, is it, for a year? What are they going to achieve in that? I think to Kevin's point, it's going to detract people from moving away, from doing their actual role. I think it's a little bit ignorant to say that there's a load of 18-year-olds out there with no direction. Aren't we pushing lots of people to go to further education and do careers? I think perhaps the problem is actually having jobs at the end of that further education. So we're putting another step in for them to do that. And how many of the people on the show actually as older adults, if you like, would be happy to give up 25% of their weekends, no choice about it, with no pay? And I think you're forcing on, sort of something on people who, by the way, can't vote for this either.
In 18 you can vote.
Yeah, 18 you can vote, but actually
you mean future generations?
Leading up to that, it's too late by then.
But
that's interesting.
But Steve, it is a good point. Look, my kids are all over 18 now, but they all worked at weekends. They all had jobs, or they all played sport, or they did music and drama, and somehow they're going to be pulled away from that on a compulsory basis. I'd have more time for the government if it said it was going to come in with a new apprenticeship programme so people could train as electricians, plumbers, plasterers, bricklayers.
Well, they all went. We'll be closed down polytechnics.
All of that, I would say yes. That is good.
So
you can
would I,
capture some people, but don't pretend it's national service. It's only 1 in every 25 of those 18-year-olds would actually go into the armed forces. 1 in every 25, and the others would be, let's be honest, getting in the way of other people doing their jobs.
This is filling the gap that's disappeared with those apprenticeships gone, technical colleges gone, polytechnics have gone. It is.
Okay, I don't think they're going to be training as bricklayers or plumbers. I think it's going to be more into the services, presumably, and maybe care as well. Steve, thank you very much for your call. Sylvia from North Yorkshire, what's your thoughts on this new scheme by the Conservative government?
Well, yeah, I think national service should be reintroduced. I was in the army. I enjoyed it. I've seen 18, 19-year-olds being marched along, and it teaches them respect, common sense, how to look after themselves. And yes, you can learn a trade in the army.
Can I ask, Sylvia, did you electively enter the army? Did you want to enter the army? Well, that's the problem with this, isn't it? You're going to be a better member of the armed forces if you want to be there. If you're forcing people to join the armed forces in a national service scheme, you're going to get reluctant individuals that can't be bothered getting up, shining their shoes or doing anything they want to do. That should generally making it miserable for everybody else around. Don't you want people that want to be there? And they already have a recruitment crisis.
You know, you say they can't be bothered to get up. They have to get up. If they don't get up, then, you know, they get restriction of privileges, ROPs, as it was called.
They won't care.
You know, the way that the instructors speak to, you know, the trainees, they don't frighten them. They just sort of, I suppose, embarrass them into doing what has to be done. But yeah, national service, I think it should, because after 6 weeks, if you don't like it, you can come out.
Oh, I didn't see that anywhere in the small print, Sylvia, but that might be the case, and maybe that then would function. You'll have to deal with 6 weeks of the people that really don't want to be there. Thank you very much for your call. Jane from Hertfordshire, what's your view on this scheme? Would you enter it? Would you like to go do a national service?
I think it's absolutely terrible, and I'm incensed by the way that they're generalising a whole generation. My daughter's just turned 18, and she's been working since the day she was 16. She's currently doing an apprenticeship in a school. She leaves home at 6:30 in the morning and she walks. She works Monday to Friday. And for them to say that she should have to volunteer on a Saturday because she needs to pull her socks up, I think it's disgraceful.
Jane, it does.
When you put it driving lessons.
When you put it like that, it does sound a little silly.
How is that
My gut feeling, Jane, is that this isn't really targeting your daughter.
Absolutely.
This would be
But
targeting.
it's compulsory.
Yeah.
It is true. I mean, so what would you say?
Service,
Jane,
or she works on a Saturday voluntarily, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that to Mike, because Mike's very pro this idea.
Yeah.
What would you say to Jane? She's got a daughter that already works every day that she can, volunteering, and you're going to force her to do more?
Jane, I'm delighted what you've told us about your daughter. I'm exactly the same as your daughter. I had a job from 13 years of age when I did a paper round, right the way through for the rest of my life, OK? Now, I don't think this has been explained terribly well, because all three of us here have got a different version of what we think it's all about, OK?
I've read it.
Yeah, and I have
That's
as
why
well.
I know.
I have as well, and I'm trying to interpret it. And one of my interpretations is that each case will be taken on its merits. This is not designed to load a heap more work on somebody who's already in full employment and working hard. This is designed to offer opportunities for those who are struggling to find a purpose in life.
No, it's not.
It is.
You want
It is.
Mike, if you want a scheme to do that, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
This
is the
isn't
scheme.
that.
Well, I believe this,
I mean,
this is the scheme.
And Jane has just banged the nail on the head.
And I've agreed with her.
Why scapegoat people like her daughter?
I totally agree, and her daughter won't be scapegoat. You will find that it will have a much, much broader application to that generation, Generation Z, some of whom are struggling.